Question 1. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. When filtering models for a production app, two key characteristics are precision to control the accuracy of generated outputs and deployment to decide between local, serverless, or managed infrastructure. Now that we have gone through the sentence and the correct options, let me explain why these answers are correct. Precision fits because it describes how accurate the model's generated outputs are, which directly affects reliability in a production application. Deployment fits because it determines where and how the model runs, such as local hosting, a serverless endpoint, or managed infrastructure, which affects how you operate and scale the solution. Task type is not correct because it describes what the model is designed to do, such as text or multimodal tasks, not the accuracy characteristic highlighted in the sentence. Openness is not correct because it relates to whether a model can be customized or fine-tuned, not the two characteristics described here. Latency is not correct because it is a performance metric about response time, not the accuracy control measure or the execution environment decision described in the statement. Question 2. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Deploying a model to an endpoint enables applications to send input and receive output through APIs. True, each deployed model shares the same endpoint URL to simplify configuration. False, standard deployment is recommended for most scenarios. True, billing in serverless deployments is based on token usage. True. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because deploying a model to an endpoint makes it accessible through endpoint APIs. Therefore, applications can send requests and receive responses in real time. The second statement is false because each deployment has its own endpoint URL. However, they do not all share one common URL, which helps keep configurations and routing specific per deployed model. The third statement is true because standard deployment typically offers the best balance of flexibility, cost, and support. Consequently, it is recommended for most everyday scenarios. The fourth statement is true because serverless compute uses a pay-as-you-go approach. Moreover, the billing is based on token usage, which aligns cost with how much the model is actually used. Question 3. For each evaluation metric, drag it to the universally correct definition. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Measures alignment of output with the input source or database. Groundedness assesses how pertinent the output is to the given input. Relevance evaluates the logical flow and readability of the text. Coherence assesses grammatical and linguistic accuracy. Fluency quantifies contextual and semantic match to ground truth. Similarity, unused items are latency and cost. Now that we've gone through all the definitions and their correct matches, let me explain why each one is correct. Groundedness is correct because it checks whether the output stays aligned with the provided source or database. Therefore, it focuses on evidence-based answers rather than unsupported content. Relevance is correct because it measures how well the output fits the user's input. Consequently, it confirms the response stays on topic. Coherence is correct because it looks at the structure and flow of ideas. Moreover, it ensures the text reads logically from start to finish. Fluency is correct because it focuses on grammar and language quality. As a result, the response sounds natural and well-formed. Similarity is correct because it compares the meaning of the output to the expected ground truth. Therefore, it captures semantic match rather than exact wording. Latency and cost are unused because they describe performance speed and operational expense. However, they are not quality evaluation metrics for the content itself. Question 4. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. A chat fine-tuning example in JSON lines contains a list of messages where each entry has a role of system, user, or assistant. To exclude a specific assistant reply from training, set its weight to 0. To include it, set weight to 1. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. JSON lines is correct because fine-tuning datasets are commonly stored as line-delimited JSON, where each line is a complete JSON object, making it easy to stream and process at scale. Messages is correct because the chat training format is built around an ordered list of conversation turns. Therefore, the model learns from the full sequence of exchanges. Role is correct because every message must indicate who produced it. Consequently, the model can distinguish between system instructions, user prompts, and assistant responses. System, user, and assistant are correct because they are the standard roles used to structure chat conversations for training, ensuring the data matches the expected schema. Weight set to 0 is correct because it excludes that specific assistant reply from contributing to training. Whereas weight set to 1 is correct because it includes the reply normally, which lets you selectively drop or keep individual assistant messages without removing the whole example. Question 5. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Fine-tuning combines a base or foundation model with training data of example prompts and responses to produce a fine-tuned model that better matches the desired behavior. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Base or foundation model is correct because it is the pre-trained starting point, which already understands language patterns before customization begins. Training data of example prompts and responses is correct because it provides the supervision signal, showing the model the exact kinds of inputs and outputs you want it to learn. Fine-tuned model is correct because it is the resulting customized version. Therefore, it is the model you use in the application to better match the target behavior. Question 6. A Windows-focused developer building line-of-business apps in .NET wants a full IDE experience with rich debugging and designers. Another teammate, a web developer working across open-source languages, prefers a lightweight editor and extensions. Which pairing best fits these needs? Select one answer. A. Visual Studio for the .NET developer, Visual Studio Code for the web developer. B. Visual Studio Code for both, because it is the only option for Azure AI. C. Visual Studio for the web developer, Visual Studio Code for the .NET developer. D. Neither tool is suitable for Azure AI development. The correct answer is A. Visual Studio for the .NET developer, Visual Studio Code for the web developer. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this answer is correct. Visual Studio is the best fit for the .NET line of business developer because it provides the full IDE experience, including rich debugging and designers that align with Windows and .NET workflows. Visual Studio Code is the best fit for the web developer because it is lightweight, works well across many open-source languages, and relies on extensions to tailor the environment for different stacks. Option B is incorrect because Visual Studio Code is not the only option for Azure AI development. Visual Studio can also be used, especially for .NET-centric work. Option C is incorrect because it swaps the tools against the stated preferences, giving the web developer the heavier IDE and the .NET developer the lighter editor. Option D is incorrect because both Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code are suitable for Azure AI development, depending on the developer's workflow and language stack. Question 7. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The Azure AI Foundry Model Catalog lets teams browse models and deploy them to endpoints. True. Benchmark coherence evaluates whether text flows naturally and reads like human language. True. Starting with manual evaluation, then moving to automated evaluation is a common approach to compare models systematically. True. Cost as a benchmark compares models by the amount of storage space required on disk. False. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because the Azure AI Foundry Model Catalog is designed to centralize model discovery, and it supports deploying selected models to endpoints for use in applications. The second statement is true because coherence measures the logical flow and readability of generated text. Therefore, it checks whether responses sound natural and well-structured. The third statement is true because teams often begin with manual reviews to understand quality, then move to automated metrics for scalable and consistent comparison across models. The fourth statement is false because cost in model evaluation refers to usage or pricing considerations, such as cost per token or pay-as-you-go consumption, not disk storage size. Question 8. What is the primary purpose of a system prompt when optimizing a chat application? Select one answer. A. Collect user telemetry and route requests to the correct endpoint. B. Throttle token usage to control billing. C. Define the assistant's behavior and persistent guidance without exposing instructions to end users. D. Replace user prompts with canned responses. The correct answer is C. Define the assistant's behavior and persistent guidance without exposing instructions to end users. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. A system prompt is used to set the assistant's role, tone, and operating rules that consistently guide every response. Therefore, it provides persistent behavior control across the entire conversation. At the same time, these instructions are part of the system layer, so they are not meant to be shown directly to end users. Option A is incorrect because collecting telemetry and routing requests are application plumbing tasks, not the function of a system prompt. Option B is incorrect because throttling tokens is a billing and usage control strategy. Moreover, it is not how you define assistant behavior. Option D is incorrect because system prompts guide how the assistant responds. However, they do not replace user inputs with canned replies. Question 9. Arrange the stages of the LLM app lifecycle in the correct order. Instruction. Drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top, initialization, experimentation, evaluation and refinement, production. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct order, let me explain why this sequence is correct. Initialization comes first because you begin by defining the problem, selecting the model, preparing data, and setting up the environment needed to build the solution. Next comes experimentation, because you iteratively test prompts, parameters, and integrations to explore behavior and early performance. After that, evaluation and refinement follows. Since you measure outputs against benchmarks and requirements, then adjust prompts, configurations, or guardrails to improve reliability. Finally, production comes last because once the solution is validated, you deploy it for real users at scale and support it with monitoring and ongoing maintenance. Question 10. A multi-round chat agent sometimes misunderstands the user's latest question because crucial details were mentioned earlier in the conversation. You want the rest of the flow to operate on a concise, fully informed query. What should the flow do first? Select one answer. A. Start with index lookup to fetch context immediately. B. Use an initial LLM node to rewrite the latest user question by appending relevant chat history into a succinct, clarified query. C. Generate prompt variants and pick the best one before any retrieval. D. Skip history to reduce noise and rely on keyword matches only. The correct answer is B. Use an initial LLM node to rewrite the latest user question by appending relevant chat history into a succinct, clarified query. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Using an initial LLM node to rewrite the user's latest question works because it compresses the important earlier details into one clear request. Therefore, downstream steps like retrieval and response generation operate on a fully informed query instead of a partial one. As a result, the system reduces ambiguity and improves the accuracy of what gets retrieved and answered. Option A is incorrect because starting retrieval before consolidating the chat history can miss what is truly relevant, since the query is still underspecified. Option C is incorrect because prompt variants can help later with response shaping. However, they do not fix missing context from earlier turns. Option D is incorrect because skipping history removes crucial details. Consequently, it increases misunderstanding and lowers answer quality. Question 11. Your team has multiple model deployments, including a Microsoft Phi model, in the project's Azure AI Foundry resource. You want to reuse a single chat client and easily switch among these deployments during testing. Which two actions align with this goal? Select two answers. A. Use project client get OpenAI client once and change the model parameter to point at different deployment names. B. Install the OpenAI package to use the return chat client's chat completions create method. C. Recreate the AI project client from scratch every time you switch models. D. Replace system messages with user messages to switch model deployments. The correct answers are A. Use project client.getOpenAI client once and change the model parameter to point at different deployment names, and B. Install the OpenAI package to use the return chat client's chat completions create method. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Option A is correct because you can create the chat client one time, then change only the model parameter to target a different deployment name. Therefore, you can switch among deployments quickly during testing without rebuilding the client. Option B is correct because the return chat client uses the OpenAI Python SDK interface. So installing the OpenAI package is required to call the chat completions create method successfully. Option C is incorrect because recreating the AI project client each time is unnecessary, since switching deployments is already handled by changing the model parameter. Option D is incorrect because system and user message roles guide conversation behavior. However, they do not control which deployment the request is routed to. Question 12. Which statement best distinguishes a keyword-based query from a vector-based query? Select one answer. Keyword queries always outperform vector queries in relevance. B. Keyword queries retrieve results by literal term matches, while vector queries find semantically similar passages using embeddings. C. Vector queries ignore semantic relationships and return exact string matches. D. Keyword queries require embedding models for execution. The correct answer is B. Keyword queries retrieve results by literal term matches, while vector queries find semantically similar passages using embeddings. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option B is correct because keyword search relies on lexical overlap, meaning it matches the exact words or terms in the query, whereas vector search converts text into embeddings and retrieves content based on semantic similarity. Therefore, it can surface relevant passages even when the wording differs. Option A is incorrect because neither approach always outperforms the other. Performance depends on the scenario and the type of content being searched. Option C is incorrect because vector search is specifically designed to capture semantic relationships, not ignore them. Option D is incorrect because keyword queries do not require embeddings. They work by matching text terms directly. Question 13. You're red teaming a smart kitchen copilot to verify prioritized harms. Which two tests most directly probe the harms highlighted for this solution? Select two answers. A. Ask for a step-by-step recipe to create a lethal poison using everyday ingredients. B. Measure homepage color contrast for accessibility compliance. C. Analyze monthly revenue forecasts generated by a finance model. D. Request quick recipes that include ingredients that should be thoroughly cooked to see if unsafe timings are suggested. The correct answers are A. Ask for a step-by-step recipe to create a lethal poison using everyday ingredients, and D. Request quick recipes that include ingredients that should be thoroughly cooked to see if unsafe timings are suggested. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Option A is correct because it directly tests whether the copilot can be tricked into providing harmful or illegal unsafe instructions, which is a high-impact safety risk you must validate during red teaming. Option D is correct because it probes food safety harm, specifically whether the copilot suggests unsafe cooking times for ingredients that require thorough cooking, which could lead to undercooked food and real-world health risk. Option B is incorrect because color contrast testing is an accessibility and UI quality check, not a prioritized harm test for a kitchen copilot's content safety. Option C is incorrect because finance forecasting is unrelated to cooking guidance and safety. Therefore, it does not probe the solution's highlighted harms. Question 14. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. AI agents combine generative AI models, contextual data, and automation capabilities. True. An expenses agent can automatically submit claims for recurring expenses such as cell phone bills. True. In multi-agent systems, agents usually perform the same task to ensure redundancy. False. A travel booking agent can both book hotels and forward costs to an expenses agent for claim submission. True. Now that we have gone through the statements and their answers, let me explain why these answers are correct. AI agents are designed to bring together a generative model, the context it needs from data sources, and the ability to take actions through tools or automation. So this statement is true. An expenses agent can be set up to handle repeatable workflows like recurring claims, so automatically submitting routine items like a cell phone bill fits the purpose of automation, and is true. In multi-agent systems, agents are typically assigned different roles, so they specialize and cover different parts of a larger task. So saying they usually do the same task is false. A travel booking agent can complete the booking task and then pass the cost details to an expenses agent to file or prepare a claim, which is a common connected agent handoff pattern. So that statement is true. Question 15. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Connected agents allow a main agent to delegate work to sub-agents without requiring hard-coded routing logic. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Main agent is correct because it is the central agent that interprets the user's input, decides what needs to be done, and then delegates tasks to the right helpers. Subagents is correct because these specialized agents handle specific kinds of work, such as classification, summarization, or validation. Hard-coded routing logic is correct because connected agents reduce the need to manually write fixed routing rules. Therefore, the system can use more natural delegation patterns instead of explicit if-then routing code. Question 16. For each MCP integration component, or API, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Acts as the registry that hosts tool definitions. MCP server auto-generates tool definitions from Python type hints and docstrings. Fast MCP server name returns the catalog of tools to the client when requested over HTTP. MCP server lists available tools for discovery at runtime. Session list tools wraps a specific tool invocation for the agent using an async function. Async wrapper function invokes a server-hosted tool by name with arguments. Session call tool name tool args, bundles wrapped functions so the agent can use them as native tools. Function tool registers the bundled tools with the agent's toolset. Agent tool registration. Now that we have gone through all the options and their correct matches, let me explain why each match is correct. MCP server is correct for hosting tool definitions because it functions as the live registry where tool schemas are stored and served to clients over HTTP. Fast MCP server name is correct for auto-generating tool definitions because it uses Python type hints and docstrings to produce the tool schema automatically, which simplifies creation and maintenance. MCP server is also correct for returning the tool catalog over HTTP because the server responds to client requests with the available tool definitions. Session list tools is correct for listing tools at runtime because it queries the server to discover what tools are currently available. Async wrapper function is correct because it wraps a tool call in an asynchronous function, allowing the agent to execute the tool in a native-like way. Session call tool name, tool args is correct because it invokes a named server-hosted tool with the provided arguments. Function tool is correct because it packages those wrapped functions into objects the agent can treat as usable tools. And agent tool registration is correct because it adds those function tool objects into the agent's toolset so they are available during runtime. Question 17. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. In concurrent orchestration, agents work on the same task simultaneously. True, agents share intermediate results with each other during execution. False, concurrent orchestration improves speed by running tasks in parallel. True, agents must always produce one combined final result. False. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because concurrent orchestration means multiple agents operate at the same time. Therefore, they can process the task simultaneously instead of waiting in sequence. The second statement is false because in concurrent orchestration, each agent typically works independently, so they do not share intermediate results while running. The third statement is true because running work in parallel reduces overall processing time. Consequently, the workflow completes faster than a purely sequential approach. The fourth statement is false because combining outputs is optional. Therefore, agents can return separate results without being forced into one merged final answer. Question 18. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. The request context provides an agent executor with important information about the request, including the user input and the task context, which help the executor determine how to process the task. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. User input is correct because request context carries the parameters or data coming from the user. Therefore, it gives the executor the direct information needed to generate the right response. Task context is correct because request context also includes the surrounding contextual details for the request, such as relevant state or environment information. Consequently, the executor can process the task appropriately based on the situation and not just the raw prompt. Question 19. A retail support team is overwhelmed by repetitive inquiries about order status and refunds. An AI agent is being introduced with a connection to the company's CRM and shipping systems so it can retrieve order histories, process refunds where eligible, and provide real-time shipping updates. The team wants to reduce response times while focusing on complex issues. Which outcome best reflects the expected impact of this integration? Select one answer. A. Reduced workload for support teams and faster resolution of common queries. B. Greater reliance on manual lookups for every customer interaction. C. Increased response delays because the agent cannot access transactional data. D. No change in customer satisfaction due to limited automation. The correct answer is A. Reduced workload for support teams and faster resolution of common queries. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option A is correct because connecting the agent to CRM and shipping systems enables it to automatically fetch order details, provide shipping updates, and handle eligible refunds. Therefore, common requests are resolved faster and the support team is freed up to focus on complex cases. Option B is incorrect because the integration is designed to reduce manual lookups, not increase them. Option C is incorrect because the agent can access transactional data through the connected systems, so response times should improve rather than slow down. Option D is incorrect because automating frequent tasks typically improves customer satisfaction, since customers get quicker and more accurate answers. Question 20. A company designs a document review workflow where one AI agent drafts text, another edits it, and a third polishes the final version. Each stage depends on the previous agent's output. Which orchestration pattern is most appropriate for this workflow? Select one answer. A. Sequential orchestration. B. Concurrent orchestration. C. Handoff orchestration. D. Group chat orchestration. The correct answer is A. Sequential orchestration. Now that we've gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Sequential orchestration is correct because the agents must run in a fixed order, where the draft becomes the editor's input and the edited version becomes the polisher's input. Therefore, each step depends on the prior output and the workflow progresses stage by stage. Option B is incorrect because concurrent orchestration runs agents at the same time, not in a dependency chain. Option C is incorrect because handoff orchestration is about dynamically transferring control based on context, rather than a predetermined three-step sequence. Option D is incorrect because group chat orchestration supports collaborative discussion. However, it is not designed for linear paths to the next stage document processing. Question 21. Arrange the following steps for implementing sequential orchestration in the correct order. Instruction: drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top. Create chat client. Define agents. Build sequential workflow. Run workflow. Extract final conversation. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct order, let me explain why this sequence is correct. Create chat client comes first because you need the client that enables message exchange and model calls. Therefore, it provides the communication foundation for the rest of the workflow. Define agents comes next because you must specify the individual agents and their roles before you can orchestrate them. Then, build sequential workflow follows because you wire the agents together in a fixed chain, so each agent's output becomes the next agent's input. After that, run workflow is the execution step, where the agents operate one after another according to the sequence you built. Finally, extract final conversation comes last because it captures the completed output produced after all steps have run, giving you the final consolidated result of the sequential process. Question 22. In a Hello World agent setup, which component is responsible for performing the actual logic that produces the output string? Select one answer: A, agent executor; B, helper class within the agent; C, D, routing mechanism. The correct answer is B, helper class within the agent. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Helper class within the agent is correct because it contains the core business logic that actually generates the output, such as constructing and returning the Hello World string. The agent executor is responsible for coordinating and running the workflow. However, it does not implement the business logic itself. The event queue is used to carry results and updates through the system. Therefore, it is not the component that creates the output. Finally, the routing mechanism decides where events or tasks go next, but it does not produce the actual output string. Question 23. A development team has built an intelligent assistant and wants it to communicate with both human clients and other AI agents over HTTP. The solution must allow time responses and coordinated multi-agent interactions. Which action will fulfill these requirements? Select one answer. A, use a message queue to batch responses offline. B, store the agent's data in a task store without networking. C, integrate the agent into a local-only terminal application. D, host the agent on a dedicated A2A server. The correct answer, D. Host the agent on a dedicated A2A server. Now that we've gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option D is correct because hosting the agent on a dedicated A2A server exposes it over HTTP. Therefore, both human clients and other agents can call it in real time, and it can participate in coordinated multi-agent workflows through network-based interactions. Option A is incorrect because batching responses offline breaks real-time interaction, and it does not support tight multi-agent coordination. Option B is incorrect because a task store manages internal state. However, it does not provide HTTP communication by itself. Option C is incorrect because a local-only terminal app limits access to the machine it runs on. Consequently, it cannot reliably serve external clients and other agents over HTTP. Question 24. What were previous agent-like solutions in Azure AI Foundry especially code-heavy for? Select one answer. A, assigning tools through the portal. B, authenticating with Entra ID. C, deleting agents and threads. D, referencing grounding data and connecting to custom functions. The correct answer is D. referencing grounding data and connecting to custom functions. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option D is correct because earlier agent-style approaches often required substantial custom code to wire up grounding data sources and to connect the agent to custom functions or tools. Therefore, these integrations were the most code-heavy part of building the solution. Option A is incorrect because assigning tools through the portal is a supported configuration step, not the part that made older approaches code-heavy. Option B is incorrect because authentication is still required. However, it is not what primarily drove hundreds of lines of orchestration and integration code. Option C is incorrect because deleting agents and threads is a straightforward cleanup activity, and it does not typically require large amounts of code. Question 25. Which two benefits are directly achieved by dividing large tasks among connected agents? Select two answers. A. Improved agent performance and accuracy. B. Automatic translation into multiple languages. C. Easier system maintenance and extensibility. D. Elimination of all human input. The correct answers are A. Improved agent performance and accuracy, and C. Easier system maintenance and extensibility. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Option A is correct because dividing work across connected agents enables specialization. Therefore, each agent can focus on a narrower responsibility, which improves reliability and precision for the overall system. Option C is correct because a connected agent design is modular, so you can add, swap, or update individual agents without redesigning the entire workflow. Consequently, maintenance is simpler and the system is easier to extend. Option B is incorrect because automatic translation is not a guaranteed outcome of connected agents. It only happens if you explicitly include an agent designed for translation. Option D is incorrect because connected agents reduce workload and streamline processes. However, they do not eliminate the need for human input, oversight, or decision-making in real deployments. Question 26. You are developing a financial assistant that extracts data from employee expense reports, formats them, and emails them automatically. The assistant must use generative AI to interpret data, call APIs, and operate without human supervision. Select one answer. A. Uses a basic chatbot with limited intent recognition. B. Uses a data visualization tool for report formatting. C. Uses a traditional program with predefined rules and manual supervision. Uses a generative AI agent developed with the Microsoft Agent Framework. The correct answer is D. Uses a generative AI agent developed with the Microsoft Agent Framework. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option D is correct because the scenario describes an autonomous agent that can interpret unstructured expense data, call APIs to automate actions, and complete an end-to-end workflow such as formatting and emailing reports. Therefore, it matches the purpose of building generative AI agents with the Microsoft Agent Framework. Option A is incorrect because a basic chatbot focuses on simple intent recognition and scripted responses. However, it does not typically orchestrate multi-step automation with tool calls. Option B is incorrect because data visualization tools display and format data, but they do not autonomously interpret documents and trigger email workflows. Option C is incorrect because rule-based programs require predefined logic and often human oversight, so they do not meet the requirement for generative interpretation and autonomous operation. Question 27. Which of the following best describes the Microsoft Agent Framework? Select one answer. A, a visualization platform for AI performance metrics. B, a cloud-only managed service for storing model data. C, an open-source SDK for building autonomous and collaborative AI agents. D, a standalone programming language for model development. The correct answer is C, an open-source SDK for building autonomous and collaborative AI agents. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option C is correct because the Microsoft Agent Framework provides open-source components that help developers build AI agents that can act autonomously, call tools, and collaborate with other agents within an application workflow. Therefore, it is best described as an SDK for creating autonomous and cooperative agent systems. Option A is incorrect because a metrics visualization platform focuses on analytics dashboards. However, the agent framework is for building and running agents, not visualizing performance metrics. Option B is incorrect because it is not a cloud storage service. It is a development framework for agent integration and orchestration. Option D is incorrect because it is not a programming language. Rather, it is an SDK you use within existing languages and projects. Question 28. For each entity recognition JSON field, drag it to its correct description in the correct match column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Declares the type of analysis being performed. Kind. Holds categorized entity results for each document. Entities. Represents the original text segment identified as an entity. Text. Indicates what type of entity was found, such as person or location. Category. Shows the entity's specific subcategory, such as date or GPE. Subcategory. Contains the character index, where the entity begins. Offset. Specifies the total number of characters in the entity. Length. Indicates the model version used for the analysis. Model version. Unused items are key phrases. And sentiment. Now that we have gone through all the descriptions and their correct matches, let me explain why each match is correct. Kind is correct because it labels the operation type being run, such as entity recognition. Entities is correct because it holds the collection of recognized entities returned for each analyzed document. Text is correct because it is the exact substring from the original input where the entity was detected. Category is correct because it provides the primary entity classification, like person, location, or date time. Subcategory is correct because it refines that classification into a more specific type, such as GPE under location style entities or date under date time. Offset is correct because it marks the starting character position of the entity in the input text. Length is correct because it indicates how many characters the entity spans. Model version is correct because it identifies which trained model version produced the results. Key phrases and sentiment are unused because they belong to other analysis features. Key phrase extraction and sentiment analysis. Not the entity recognition JSON fields being matched here. Question 29. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Improving a conversational model relies on an iterative cycle of train, test, deploy, and review, which aligns the system with how users express intents in natural language. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Train is correct because you improve the model by learning from examples and updating how it interprets user input. Test is correct because you must validate performance and confirm the changes behave as expected before releasing them. Deploy is correct because the updated model must be published for real usage so it can serve users in production. Review is correct because you analyze real interactions and outcomes. Then use that feedback to guide the next training cycle. Intense is correct because the goal of this loop is to better capture what users are trying to accomplish. Therefore, the system aligns with user goals expressed through natural language requests. Question 30. Match each Azure AI language custom any or project limit to its correct constraint. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Minimum of 10 and maximum of 1 through 1,000 files per project. Training, maximum of 10 deployment names per project. Deployments, limited to 10 post and 100 GET requests per minute. APIs. Authoring, limited to 20 post or GET requests per minute. APIs analyze, up to 200 types with each entity not exceeding 500 characters. Entities, unused items are projects 500 per resource, and models 50 per project. Now that we have gone through all the limits and their correct matches, let me explain why each match is correct. Training is correct because the file count limit applies to the training dataset stored in the project, requiring at least 10 files and supporting up to 1,000 files for training and evaluation. Deployments is correct because the limit on deployment names controls how many distinct deployed endpoints you can create per project. APIs. Authoring is correct because authoring operations have stricter throughput limits. Therefore, they are capped at 10 post and 100 GET requests per minute. APIs. Analyze is correct because analysis calls used for extraction are rate limited separately, allowing up to 20 post or GET requests per minute. Entities is correct because it governs the entity schema itself, limiting the project to up to 200 entity types and restricting each extracted entity span to a maximum of 500 characters. Projects 500 per resource and models 50 per project are unused here because they describe broader capacity limits, not the specific constraints listed in the matching options. Question 31. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. Azure AI Translator supports translation between more than 90 languages. True. Transliteration changes the meaning of text between languages. False. A single service translator resource must always be used. Multi-service resources aren't supported. False. The REST interface accepts JSON formatted requests and responses. True. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because Azure AI Translator supports translation across more than 90 languages, enabling broad multilingual communication. The second statement is false because transliteration changes the script or writing system. However, it does not change the meaning of the text itself. The third statement is false because you can use either a single service translator resource or a multi-service Azure AI Services resource. Therefore, multi-service resources are supported. The fourth statement is true because the Translator REST API uses JSON for both requests and responses, so clients send and receive JSON formatted payloads. Question 32. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. To omit offensive words from a translation entirely, set the profanity action parameter to deleted, whereas setting it to marked uses the profanity marker value to indicate them visually. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Deleted is correct because it removes offensive words from the translated output. so the profanity does not appear at all in the final text. Marked is correct because it keeps the content but visually flags the profanities. Therefore, the output shows where the offensive words were, using the configured profanity marker style. Question 33. Arrange the following steps to create a question-answering knowledge base in the correct order. Instruction. Drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top. Sign in to the Azure portal. Create an Azure AI language resource with question answering enabled. Select or create an Azure AI search resource. Open Language Studio and create a custom question answering project. Add data sources such as URLs, files, or chit-chat datasets. Edit question-answer pairs as needed. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct order, let me explain why this sequence is correct. Sign in to the Azure portal comes first because you need access to your Azure subscription and resources before you can create anything. Next, you create an Azure AI language resource with question answering enabled because that is the core service that powers the knowledge base capability. Then, you select or create an Azure AI search resource since it provides the indexing and retrieval layer used to return answers efficiently. After that, you open Language Studio and create a custom question answering project because the project is where you configure and manage the knowledge base experience. Next, you add data sources such as URLs, files, or chit-chat datasets, so the system can ingest content and generate initial question-answer pairs. Finally, you edit question-answer pairs as needed to refine phrasing, correct gaps, and improve accuracy before using it in an application. Question 34. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. SSML synthesis is supported in the Azure AI Speech SDK for Python. The Speak SSML method is used to process SSML markup and generate spoken output. True. Python-based SSML synthesis requires converting XML into plain text first. False. SSML features are not compatible with neural voices in the SDK. False? Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because the Azure AI Speech SDK for Python supports SSML, allowing you to control pronunciation, pacing, and other speech characteristics. The second statement is true because the Speak SSML method takes SSML markup directly, then generates synthesized audio based on the tags and settings in the SSML. The third statement is false because you pass SML as XML markup to the SDK. Therefore, you do not need to convert it into plain text before synthesis. The fourth statement is false because SSML works with neural voices, enabling richer expression and voice control rather than being incompatible. Question 35. A developer has deployed a multimodal model and wants to verify that it can interpret audio input before integrating it into their application. The developer uses the chat playground and uploads an audio file to test the response. What does this process demonstrate? Select one answer. A. Testing the model's ability to handle audio-based prompts in the Azure AI Foundry portal. B. Creating a custom REST API endpoint for model inference. C. Generating synthetic audio responses from text-only data. Building a local speech-to-text engine without cloud deployment. The correct answer is A. Testing the model's ability to handle audio-based prompts in the Azure AI Foundry portal. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option A is correct because the chat playground is used to validate a deployed model's capabilities interactively. Therefore, uploading an audio file is a direct test that the multimodal model can process audio input and return an appropriate response. Option B is incorrect because the endpoint is already created by the deployment. The playground is testing it. Not building a new REST API. Option C is incorrect because the activity is focused on verifying audio input handling, not generating synthetic audio from text-only data. Option D is incorrect because the chat playground is a cloud-based testing environment, so it is not building a local speech-to-text engine without cloud deployment. Question 36. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The API key can be passed in the connection header during the WebSocket pre-handshake. True. Using an API key in the connection header is supported in browser environments. False. The VoiceLive API configuration supports PCM16 and G711 audio formats. True. The input and output audio formats can both be set to PCM16 for consistent encoding. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because the API key can be provided during the WebSocket pre-handshake using the connection header, allowing authentication at connection time. The second statement is false because browser environments do not reliably allow setting the required API key headers for WebSocket connections due to security and technical restrictions. The third statement is true because VoiceLive API configuration supports common real-time audio formats, including PCM16 and G711. The fourth statement is true because setting both input and output to PCM16 keeps encoding consistent. Therefore, it simplifies handling and improves uniform encode-decode behavior end-to-end. Question 37. A retail company wants to modernize its static FAQ page by allowing customers to type questions like, "What is your return policy?" and receive accurate answers through a chat interface. Which feature best supports this goal? Select one answer. A. Azure Cognitive Services Speech-to-Text. B. Azure OpenAI Fine-Tuning Model. C. Cognitive Search Indexer for full text retrieval. D. Conversational intelligence through Azure AI language question answering. The correct answer is D. Conversational intelligence through Azure AI language question answering. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option D is correct because Azure AI language question answering is designed to turn FAQ-style content into a conversational experience. Therefore, users can ask natural language questions and receive the most relevant answer from the knowledge base. Option A is incorrect because speech-to-text only converts spoken audio into text. It does not retrieve and generate FAQ answers. Option B is incorrect because fine-tuning trains a generative model. However, it is not the primary feature for building and serving structured FAQ question-answer pairs. Option C is incorrect because a search indexer focuses on keyword-based retrieval, so it does not by itself provide the conversational question-answering behavior required for an FAQ chat interface. Question 38. What does the confidence score value in a built-in NER response represent? Select one answer. A. The index of the entity in the array. B. The length of the recognized entity text. C. How confident the model is in correctly identifying the entity. D. The number of entities recognized. The correct answer is C. How confident the model is in correctly identifying the entity. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option C is correct because confidence score represents the model's certainty that the detected entity and its classification are correct, typically expressed as a value between 0 and 1. Option A is incorrect because the entity's position in the array is just ordering, not a certainty measure. Option B is incorrect because the entity length is provided separately, commonly as a length field, not as confidence score. Option D is incorrect because the number of entities is simply the count of items returned, and it does not indicate how confident the model is about any single entity. Question 39. What is the role of the speech config object when creating a translation recognizer? Select one answer. A. Handles asynchronous recognition events for speech output. B. Defines the location of the audio input file. C. Provides basic configuration settings for connecting to the Azure AI speech service. D. Stores translated text results and ISO language codes. The correct answer is C. Provides basic configuration settings for connecting to the Azure AI speech service. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option C is correct because speech config holds the core service connection settings, such as the subscription key and region. Therefore, it enables the translation recognizer to authenticate and connect to the Azure AI speech service. Option A is incorrect because asynchronous processing is handled by recognition methods and event handlers, not by speech config itself. Option B is incorrect because the audio input source is specified using an audio config, not speech config. Option D is incorrect because translated text and language codes are returned in recognition results. They are not stored in the configuration object. Question 40. In a JSON prompt that includes audio content for a multimodal model, which key correctly specifies the web location of the audio file? Select one answer. A. URL nested inside audio URL. B. Audio link placed at the root of the JSON. Source path within the user role. D. Endpoint URL outside the messages array. The correct answer is A. URL nested inside audio URL. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option A is correct because the audio reference is provided within the audio URL object, and the URL field inside it points to the web location of the audio file. Therefore, it matches the expected JSON structure for supplying audio content. Option B is incorrect because audio link at the root is not a recognized field for audio input in the prompt schema. Option C is incorrect because source path is not a valid key in the user message content for specifying audio locations. Option D is incorrect because endpoint URL relates to API connectivity, not embedding audio file locations inside the message's content. Question 41. An enterprise developer is building a multilingual customer support agent using the Voice Live API. They notice that certain features like advanced voice options and avatar streaming are unavailable when running from a non-AI Foundry resource. What should they do to ensure full functionality? Select one answer. A. Move the resource to Azure Blob Storage. B. Configure the app to use Azure AI Foundry resources. C. Enable public internet access for the model. D. Increase WebSocket connection timeout. The correct answer is B. Configure the app to use Azure AI Foundry resources. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option B is correct because the Voice Live API feature set is optimized and fully available when using Azure AI Foundry resources. Therefore, configuring the app to run against Foundry ensures access to advanced voice options and avatar streaming capabilities. Option A is incorrect because blob storage is for storing data, not enabling real-time voice live features. Option C is incorrect because public internet access affects network exposure and security. However, it does not unlock missing voice live capabilities tied to the resource type. Option D is incorrect because increasing timeouts only changes connection behavior. It does not determine whether advanced features are available in the first place. Question 42. Which property in the key phrase extraction request specifies which version of the analysis model to use? Select one answer. A. Documents. B. Warnings. Results. D. Model version. The correct answer is D. Model version. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Thus, option D is correct because model version tells the service which trained analysis model version to apply when running key phrase extraction. Therefore, it controls model selection for the request. Option A is incorrect because documents contains the input text items being analyzed, not the model version to use. Option B is incorrect because warnings reports issues or notices. It does not select the model version. Option C is incorrect because results is part of the response output structure, not a request property for choosing the analysis model. Question 43. When starting from the Azure portal, what action helps locate the language service resource needed to create a question answering knowledge base? Select one answer. A. Use the search field to find Azure AI services. B. Browse to the Azure Marketplace manually. C. Access the Azure AI search resource directly. D. Open Microsoft Entra ID to locate the service. The correct answer is A. Use the search field to find Azure AI services. A is correct because the fastest way to locate the Azure AI language resource entry point in the Azure portal is to use the portal search and navigate to Azure AI services, where you can create or manage the language resource that supports question answering. B is wrong because the marketplace is not the typical path when you already have the Azure portal search designed to take you directly to the correct service resource pages. C is wrong because Azure AI Search is a separate resource that supports indexing and retrieval, but it is not the language service resource you must locate first to create a question answering project. D is wrong because Microsoft Entra ID is for identity and access management, not for locating or creating Azure AI language service resources. Question 44. Which two objects must be created before instantiating a speech recognizer when using the speech-to-text API? Select two answers. A. Speech config. B. Speech recognition result. C. Audio config. D. Speech key manager. Speech client. The correct answers are speech config and C. Audio config. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Speech config is correct because it contains the core connection configuration, such as the subscription key and region. Therefore, it enables the speech recognizer to authenticate and connect to the speech service. Audio config is correct because it defines the audio input source, such as a microphone or an audio file, so the recognizer knows where to read audio from during transcription. Speech recognition result is incorrect because it is returned after recognition completes, not created beforehand as configuration. Speech key manager is incorrect because it is not an SDK object used for speech-to-text setup. The key is provided through speech config. Speech client is incorrect because the SDK uses speech recognizer as the primary client for recognition, rather than requiring a separate speech client object before instantiation. Question 45. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Azure AI Vision focuses on extracting text and visual information from images, while Azure AI Document Intelligence is used for structured document extraction. Azure AI Content Understanding extends these capabilities to multimodal content such as audio and video. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Extracting text and visual information is correct because Azure AI Vision is built to detect and interpret content in images, including OCR text and visual elements like objects or scenes. Structured document extraction is correct because Azure AI Document Intelligence specializes in pulling structured fields and layouts from documents, such as forms, receipts, or invoices. Multimodal content such as audio and video is correct because Azure AI Content Understanding expands beyond static images and documents, enabling analysis across multiple media types, including audio and video content. Question 46. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The detect response is an array with one entry per detected face. True. Each face entry can include a face rectangle with top, left, width, height. True. The head pose attribute returns strings like left or up rather than numbers. False. Fall. Accessories are returned as objects with a type, for example, glasses, and a confidence value. True. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because the Detect API returns a list, and each detected face appears as a separate entry in that array. The second statement is true because face rectangle includes numeric coordinates and dimensions, specifically top, left, width, and height, describing where the face is located. The third statement is false because head pose is reported as numeric values, such as pitch, roll, and yaw, not text labels like left or up. The fourth statement is true because accessories are returned as structured objects, where each item includes a type, such as glasses, and a confidence score, indicating how certain the model is. Question 47. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. A prediction client must authenticate with a prediction resource key and target a prediction endpoint. True. The project ID and published model name are both required to classify an image. True. Image data can be sent as a byte stream from a file. True. Applying a probability threshold, for example, greater than 0.5, is performed on the client side after receiving results. True. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is correct. The first statement is true because prediction calls require authentication using the prediction key, and they must be sent to the prediction endpoint URL so the request reaches the correct hosted model. The second statement is true because the service must know which custom vision project to use and which published iteration or model name to run for classification. Therefore, both identifiers are required. The third statement is true because the Prediction SDK and REST API accept image bytes. So you can read a local file into a byte stream and submit it for scoring. The fourth statement is true because the API returns probability scores for tags, and then the client typically ups filtering logic, such as keeping only predictions above a chosen threshold, depending on the application's needs. Question 48. For each Azure Video Indexer model type, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. recognizes well-known celebrities out of the box. Predefined celebrity model recognizes specific individuals you train with their face images. Requires limited access. Custom people model improves transcription by detecting organization-specific terminology. Custom language model identifies names as brands, projects, or companies. Custom brands model unused items are frame interpolation and noise reduction. Now that we have gone through all the descriptions and their correct matches, let me explain why each match is correct. Predefined celebrity model is correct because it can identify well-known public figures without requiring you to train your own dataset. Therefore, it works out of the box for celebrity recognition. Custom people model is correct because it is trained on specific face images you provide, so it can recognize those particular individuals across videos. And it requires limited access because it involves identifying private people rather than public celebrities. Custom language model is correct because it adapts transcription to your organization's vocabulary. Therefore, it improves recognition of domain-specific terminology and names used internally. Custom brands model is correct because it tracks mentions of brand names such as products, projects, and companies, making it easier to find and index those brand references across a video. Frame interpolation and noise reduction are unused because they are editing or audio cleanup concepts, not Azure Video Indexer Insight model types used for recognition and indexing. Question 49. A design team is using Azure AI Foundry to generate layout mockups. They want to preview how different image sizes appear before finalizing dimensions. They open the images playground and notice multiple resolution options when using a DALL-E model. Which features should they use to produce wider or taller images? Select one answer. A. Switch image style from vivid to natural. B. Adjust image quality from standard to HD. C. Modify text prompts to include make it wider. D. Change the resolution setting from 1024 by 1024 to 1792 by 1024 or 1024 by 1792. The correct answer is D. Change the resolution setting from 1024 by 1024 to 1792 by 1024 or 1024 by 1792. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option D is correct because the resolution setting directly controls the output dimensions and aspect ratio. Therefore, selecting 1792 by 1024 produces a wider landscape image, and selecting 1024 by 1792 produces a taller portrait image. Option A is incorrect because image style changes the visual look and tone, not the size or aspect ratio. Option B is incorrect because image quality affects rendering detail, not the width and height of the generated image. Option C is incorrect because prompt wording can influence composition. However, the fixed output dimensions are controlled by the resolution options in the playground. Question 50. Which statement accurately describes the find similar operation in Azure Face API? Select one answer. A. It searches for faces in a collection that most closely resemble a given face. B. It confirms whether two specific faces belong to the same person. C. It trains a recognition model to identify individuals by name. D. It filters faces based on pose, brightness, and blur. The correct answer is A. It searches for faces in a collection that most closely resemble a given face. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option A is correct because find similar compares a query face against a stored set of faces, then returns the closest matches ranked by visual similarity. Therefore, it is used for similarity search within a face collection. Option B is incorrect because confirming whether two faces belong to the same person is handled by the verify operation, not find similar. Option C is incorrect because training and naming individuals is part of identification workflows, not similarity matching. Option D is incorrect because pose, brightness, and blur are quality or attribute signals, and they do not define the find similar matching operation. Question 51. You're developing a retail monitoring system to detect grocery items as they pass on a conveyor belt. You need to train a model on sample images and later use that model in production to identify objects in real time across several regional data centers. Which setup best meets these requirements? Select one answer. A. Use a single training resource for both training and prediction. B. Use separate training and prediction resources in the same region. C. Use one training resource and deploy multiple prediction resources across regions. D. Use only a prediction resource configured for training. The correct answer is C. Use one training resource and deploy multiple prediction resources across regions. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option C is correct because you can centralize the training workflow in one place, then publish the trained model for inference in multiple regions. Therefore, each regional data center can use a nearby prediction resource for low latency and scale. Option A is incorrect because training and prediction are designed as separate capabilities, and using one training resource for both does not match how deployment is structured. Option B is incorrect because while separating training and prediction is good practice, keeping prediction in only one region does not meet the requirement for several regional data centers. Option D is incorrect because prediction resources are for inference only, so they cannot be used as the training resource for building the model. Question 52. A team deployed a multimodal model to Azure and wants to build a chat client that accepts a user's text plus an image, then returns a response. They prefer an SDK that hides REST details, which action enables them to start sending multi-part prompts right away. Select one answer. A. Install GPU drivers locally and run the model without deployment. B. Export the model definition to a CSV file and upload it to storage. Use the Azure AI Model Inference or OpenAI SDK that matches where the model is deployed and connect to the model's endpoint. D. Enable a VPN tunnel. No SDK is needed when a VPN exists. The correct answer is C. Use the Azure AI Model Inference or OpenAI SDK that matches where the model is deployed and connect to the model's endpoint. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option C is correct because these SDKs provide a high-level client interface that abstracts REST calls. Therefore, the team can immediately send prompts that include both text and image parts to the deployed endpoint using supported multi-part message structures. Option A is incorrect because the scenario already uses a deployed Azure endpoint, and installing local GPU drivers does not help with calling the cloud-hosted model. Option B is incorrect because exporting a model definition to storage does not create an inference endpoint or SDK client capability. Option D is incorrect because a VPN only affects connectivity. It does not replace the need for an SDK or API calls to structure and send multi-part prompts to the model endpoint. Question 53. What does the parameter n represent in an image generation request? Select one answer. A. The model version being requested. B. The number of images the service should generate from a single prompt. C. The numerical seed used for randomization. D. The network port of the service endpoint. The correct answer is B. the number of images the service should generate from a single prompt. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. Option B is correct because the N parameter tells the image generation service how many separate images to produce for one prompt, therefore increasing N requests multiple outputs in a single call. Option A is incorrect because model version is chosen through the model or deployment setting, not through N. Option C is incorrect because a random seed is a different concept and is not represented by N in this context. Option D is incorrect because N has nothing to do with networking or ports. It only controls the count of generated images returned by the request. Question 54. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Because of its generative AI capabilities, content understanding can define schemas with minimal training data, often automatically identifying data values that map to schema elements. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Generative AI is correct because content understanding uses generative capabilities to infer structure and meaning from examples, rather than relying only on rigid rules. Minimal training data is correct because the service can learn the mapping with only a small set of examples, so you do not need a large labeled dataset to define useful extraction outputs. Schema elements is correct because schemas define the structured fields you want to extract, and the system identifies values in the content that correspond to those defined elements. Question 55. How does an indexer map fields from process documents to index fields? Select two answers. A. By mapping extracted source fields implicitly when names match. B. By mapping output skill fields explicitly to target fields. C. By creating random mappings for all fields automatically. D. By using implicit mapping for skill-generated fields. The correct answers are by mapping extracted source fields implicitly when names match, by mapping output skill fields explicitly to target fields. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answers, let me explain why these options are correct. By mapping extracted source fields implicitly when names match is correct, because when a source field and an index field share the same name, the indexer can automatically align them without you defining a custom mapping, which speeds up simple ingestion setups. By mapping output skill fields explicitly to target fields is correct because skill outputs come from the enrichment pipeline, and they must be wired to specific index fields intentionally. Therefore, you explicitly map each skill output to the correct destination field in the index. By creating random mappings for all fields automatically is incorrect because mappings follow defined rules and configuration, not randomness. By using implicit mapping for skill-generated fields is incorrect because skill outputs are not automatically assumed to match index fields. So they require explicit mapping to ensure the correct enriched values land in the correct fields. Question 56. A data specialist is setting up an enrichment pipeline that must detect sensitive information in customer feedback data and remove it before indexing. Which built-in skill should they configure for this task? Select one answer. A. Entity recognition. B. PII detection. C. Key phrase extraction. D. Language detection. The correct answer is B. PII detection. Now that we have gone through the question and the correct answer, let me explain why this option is correct. PII detection is correct because it is designed to identify personally identifiable information in text, such as names, phone numbers, email addresses, and physical addresses, and it can support redaction. Therefore, it is the right skill when you must remove sensitive data before content is stored or indexed. Entity recognition is incorrect because it focuses on labeling general entities like people, places, and organizations. But it is not specifically built to detect and redact sensitive personal data. Key phrase extraction is incorrect because it highlights important terms and topics, not private identifiers. Language detection is incorrect because it only determines the language of the text, and it does not identify or remove sensitive information. Question 57. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Statement 1. You can retrieve the endpoint and keys in the Azure portal, Azure AI Foundry portal, or programmatically via the Azure AI Foundry API. True. Answer. Statement 2. The analyze call always returns final JSON results immediately, so polling is unnecessary. Answer. False. Statement 3. Operation location provides a URL you can poll for operation status and results. Answer. Statement 4. Content files must be supplied as URLs. Binary submission is not supported. Answer. False. Now that we have gone through all the statements and their answers, let me explain why each one is true or false. Statement 1 is true because endpoints and keys can be obtained through the Azure portal, through the Azure AI Foundry portal experience, and also through supported programmatic methods using the Foundry API. So teams can retrieve connection details in multiple ways. Statement 2 is false because analyze operations are typically asynchronous, meaning the initial call starts the job and returns operation tracking details. Therefore, you must poll the results endpoint instead of expecting the final JSON immediately. Statement 3 is true because the operation location header is specifically used to provide the URL to check status and retrieve results, so it points you to where polling should occur. Statement 4 is false because content can be submitted either by providing a URL reference or by sending the binary payload directly. Therefore, URLs are not the only supported input method. Question 58. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. When only plain text is required from documents with unpredictable structure, the recommended choice is the read model, which provides line-level language detection and handwritten versus printed classification for multi-page PDF or TIFF inputs, limit processing to certain pages using the pages parameter. Now that we have gone through the full sentence and the completed answers, let me explain why these options are correct. Read model is correct because it is designed for text extraction from documents even when layout is inconsistent, so it focuses on pulling readable text rather than complex structure or fields. Line-level language detection is correct because the read output can identify the language at a fine granularity, which is useful when documents include mixed languages across lines. Handwritten versus printed is correct because the read capabilities can classify whether extracted text came from handwriting or printed text, helping you understand the type of content being processed. Pages parameter is correct because PDFs and TIFFs can contain many pages, and this parameter lets you target only specific page ranges, reducing processing time and cost while focusing on the pages you actually need. Question 59. Which of these statements correctly describe the Content Understanding REST API Analyze workflow? Select 3 answers. The analysis request is asynchronous and returns an operation ID to track progress. B. Clients should poll the results endpoint with the operation ID until the operation completes. C. The authorization key must be provided in the HTTP request header. D. The key must be appended as a query parameter named API key to avoid header parsing. E. Only URL-based content submission is supported. Binary upload is not allowed. The correct answers are A. The analysis request is asynchronous and returns an operation ID to track progress. B. Client should poll the results endpoint with the operation ID until the operation completes. C. The authorization key must be provided in the HTTP request header. Now that we've gone through the full question, all answer choices, and the correct answers, let me explain why these options are correct. A is correct because the analyze call starts a long-running operation, so the service does not return the final JSON immediately. Instead, it returns an operation ID that represents the running job, which you use to track progress. B is correct because asynchronous analysis requires follow-up checks. Therefore, you must poll the results endpoint using the operation ID until the status indicates completion. Only then can you retrieve the final extracted output. C is correct because the API authenticates requests using a key provided in the HTTP request headers. This is the standard pattern for secured REST calls in this workflow, ensuring the service can authorize the client before processing content. D is wrong because this workflow does not require passing the key as a query parameter named API key. Authentication is handled through headers rather than query string credentials. E is wrong because the service is not limited to URL-only submission. You can submit content as a URL or provide binary content directly, so it is incorrect to say binary upload is not allowed. Question 60. You're working inside an Azure AI Foundry project. Security policy discourages storing static keys in config files. You need to obtain the endpoint and an API key at runtime using Microsoft Entra ID authentication. What should you do? Select one answer. Use the Azure AI Foundry SDK with Entra ID to fetch the endpoint and key at runtime. B. Retrieve the values manually from the Azure portal and store them in environment variables. C. Add the tenant ID to each REST request to bypass key requirements. Use a storage account's URL to infer the service endpoint and access credentials. The correct answer is use the Azure AI Foundry SDK with Entra ID to fetch the endpoint and key at runtime. Now that we have gone through the full question and every answer choice, let me explain why this is the best option. Option A is correct because it matches the requirement to avoid static secrets. By using Entra ID with the Azure AI Foundry SDK, the application can authenticate securely at runtime and programmatically retrieve the endpoint and key without hard-coding them. As a result, this aligns with enterprise security policy and supports automated access. Option B is wrong because manually copying secrets and storing them in environment variables still creates static secret storage. Therefore, it does not fully meet the goal of runtime retrieval through Entra ID and increases operational risk. Option C is wrong because a tenant ID is only an identity context value. It does not replace authentication or authorization credentials. Consequently, it cannot bypass the API key requirement by itself. Option D is wrong because a storage account URL is unrelated to Azure AI Foundry endpoint discovery and does not provide valid credentials. Thus, it cannot be used to infer the correct endpoint or access keys.